Please give a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our guest, David Kobia.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me fine? Good? Okay. So my name is David Kobia, and I'm actually from Kenya. I've lived in the South for quite a few years. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I actually started out in mechanical engineering at the University of Nairobi. Then an opportunity came up to go, come to the States. And I was a little bit in a hurry. This was in the late 90s. And internet access was kind of limited in Kenya at the time. So I put in my application online, and I was trying to get through everything as quickly as possible. So I started at A. And that's how I got to the University of Alabama. And then I read the history on my way there, and I thought, well, crap, I should have waited till C. So I'm here today to talk about innovating on the edge. Our company is actually based in Nairobi, Kenya. I came in late last night, so I'm a little jet lagged, so forgive me. I'm going to try to run through quite a few slides, and I'll pack it in. So yeah, you probably have quite a few questions after this. Before I start, I'm going to brag a little bit. So the Secretary General of the United Nations stopped by our office on Thursday, and we got to hang out for the day, which is kind of cool. So these are some of my guys from Kenya. So what is Ushahidi? This is actually, the word Ushahidi means testimony in Swahili, or witness. And it was actually a website we developed to report, to map reports of violence in Kenya. This is kind of an old explanation now, because this was 6 years ago. A lot has happened since then. So Ushahidi has become actually very many things, because we're realizing that there's so many problems to solve in Africa. So fast forward 6 years, and Ushahidi has grown into a global nonprofit technology company with origins in Kenya. And today our mission is to change the way information flows in the world and empower people to make an impact with open source technologies, cross-border partnerships, and groundbreaking ventures. So we actually started right after post-election violence in Kenya. Two candidates went, neck to neck, and I think it was 51%, 49%, and for most countries in Africa, that's too close when candidates come that close. So the country broke down. There are reports of violence all over the country, police brutality. So we created a very simple map. At the time, I think this was shortly after Google Maps became a thing. So map mashups were a thing in 2007, 2008, right? Obviously, this looks very old today, but this is where it began. And after mapping all this stuff, we thought, this happened over the course of one weekend. And we thought we'd go back to our day jobs, but then this became a thing. We started to get calls from all over the place, from South Africa to India to people saying, hey, we need something like this. We need to, we need this for election monitoring or disaster or one thing or another. So we started building an open source crowdsourcing platform. It accepted all this different types of data and output things like alerts, SMS, and actually, maybe I'll just give you some quick examples of how exactly our open source platform was used. So we have been used for citizen journalism. Harassmap was a big map in Egypt, and it mapped awareness of sexual harassment, which is a really big issue in Egypt. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the oil spill crisis, the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And they were running around the Gulf mapping the impact of the oil spill crisis on the communities around the Gulf of Mexico. Our mapping platform was used in social revolutions, And actually, one of our biggest users during the Arab Spring was the Muslim Brotherhood, which was interesting. There are actually quite a few Egyptian maps using our platform back then. And of course, many of you remember Occupy. But the biggest use of our open source platform was in disaster response. Haiti was particularly big. We worked with quite a few partners, including U.S. Southern Command and the Red Cross, just mapping needs for water or to be rescued or one thing or another. In Japan, it was, the fallout of the tsunami and the nuclear crisis. These were particularly popular. They got, where Japan was more advanced and they used our mobile apps. In Haiti, it was primarily text messages. Our system actually received 45,000 text messages during that time from a partnership with the telcos in Haiti. And I should mention too that as these text messages came in, volunteers were translating and helping map all this stuff, and then all this was forwarded on to first responders. Election monitoring is the other use case for Ushahidi amongst quite a few other use cases actually, in India and in Kenya. So what's really involved in doing all this stuff? We're realizing that technology all along has probably been 10% of the solution. Most of the work in crowdsourcing is actually, in outreach missions and project planning, in verification, geotagging stuff that comes in manually is actually really, really difficult, right? It takes time, so it takes a lot of people. And Uchaguzi, this was during the Kenyan election, I think about 300 people were involved in this effort. So I think all along, we have been assuming that, we can build a technology platform and, to crowdsource that doesn't use as many people or doesn't require as much work, but it actually requires quite a bit of work. And these are the different teams that were working on stuff during, like one event. So Ushahidi and CrowdMap is one of our other platforms, have been deployed more than 40,000 times over the course of the last 5 or 6 years in over 159 countries and over 35 languages. Moving on, so Crisis obviously has been what we have been working with for quite a few years, and using our experience, we tapped into some of the big companies. So we partnered with Facebook and Twitter in an effort to use their fire hoses to extract crisis data. Just because during a crisis, things happening so quickly, and developers, journalists, and analysts are trying to analyze stuff quickly, but it's usually very tedious, and by the time they're done, creating actionable data is really difficult, right? And it takes too long. So this is how it used to be before. You're writing so much code to try to extract crisis data. But we're now doing this for you guys so that it takes only 6 lines of code to extract crisis data. So basically the idea of Crisisnet, and actually the site is crisis.net, is combining all our partner efforts into a single platform and hopefully let 1,000 apps bloom when they're most required. Moving on, Ping is another effort out of Ushahidi. How many of you guys are familiar with the mall terrorist problem that happened in Kenya this year? Yeah? And I think HBO did a special as well. I don't know if you guys watched it. But 4 terrorists took over a mall. I mean, this is one of the scariest things, any of us can imagine. And you guys remember seeing this picture, right? This was during that crisis, and my partner wouldn't like this, but this is actually my partner's daughter, right? So we built Ping because there's a consistent problem in every disaster, and not just in Kenya, but everywhere. We need to quickly check in with each other, so we built a binary multi-channel check-in tool for groups, families, and everyone in between. Just asking, are you okay, not okay? So it is binary, on, off. And our goal for this has been to make it available for anyone to use around the world. And switching gears a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about Africa in general. The number of internet users has grown at 7 times the global average. That's clocking over 3,000% growth between 2000 and 2012 alone. And there are almost 300 million users, of the internet in Africa. It's a very underserved community. I thought I'd throw this in to show the true size of Africa. And my note for this was that it's explaining that Africa is not a country and Ebola is not all over the continent. Some people, when I tell them I just came from Kenya, instantly give me that look of, hey, wait a minute, But it's actually it's a big continent with a lot of people, very underserved. And we have been saying that if we can build technology in Africa and it works there, we believe it'll work anywhere, right? And next I'll talk about our community that we call the Innovation Hub. This is a facility in Nairobi. This is just based on our experience. We're all, the people that came together to put Ushahidi, there are 4 of us who started this thing, but we all have ties to Kenya. And we figured we need to get something going for people over there because all the tech people have been working in remote outposts. So this facility has over 16,000 members. We have hosted over 500 events to date. We try to bring people, technologists from all over the world. We've had in recent, actually in the last year, we've had people like Stephen Ellop come and talk to our community and hang out with folks. This was the CEO of Nokia. We've had the folks from GitHub come out and hang out for a week. Eric Schmidt and from Google was there as well. I mean, we've had all kinds of people come and hang out with our community. So this tech community is a facility that focuses on young entrepreneurs, and it's it's partly a co-working space. It's partly a vector for investors and VCs, and it's part incubator. This is kind of how it looks. This was the initial, it was 1 floor, and now we occupy 4 floors of a building. So it's grown significantly. The Innovation Hub includes quite a few things. It has a UX lab, which was the first in sub-Saharan Africa. We just want people to design effective technology for communities, for it to create the biggest impact. So we do all these things. We also have a mobile lab, and this particular center focuses on mobile entrepreneurship, business incubation, training. Just because mobile is so big in most developing countries, we figured we need to put quite a bit of emphasis on making sure people know how to implement it. And we're doing a lot of testing as well. And we have these are just some startups that have come out of this mobile lab. We also now run it's kind of a mini Shark Tank. It's called a Pivot. We do that once a year. And when we started out, winners got anywhere from 10 to 20,000. We have quite a few sponsors now, so we're trying to get that amount growing up to 50 and 100,000. And all this is in the Innovation Hub in Nairobi. So what's going on now is just the Innovation Hub in Nairobi has been a catalyst for other labs all over Africa. So this is just a map of some of the stuff that's happening around Africa. And we called this effort AfriLab. So this is the partnership of all these innovation hubs all over the continent, and just trying to support each other. And this is one that's been growing out of Addis in Ethiopia. It's a very cool space. It kind of looks like that space in Las Vegas. I can't remember the name of it. Downtown Las Vegas. Have you guys heard of it? There's a huge, the founder of, anyway, never mind. Moving on. Next is Cura Chicks. Obviously, women have been, extremely underserved especially in Africa. I mean, we hear about it over here, right? But it's especially bad in Africa. So this was started by some people out of the Innovation Hub. And, if there's an enormous potential for maximizing growth of technology in Africa by, increasing the number and quality of women entrepreneurs on the continent. So this is why we're doing this. And, it focuses on training and everything else in between. It has almost 500 members. Switching gears a little bit, I'll talk about our hardware efforts. And I know this is a lot. We're doing a lot of things, but we're realizing, there's so many itches to scratch and so much opportunity in Africa. So we're doing a lot of things. So what is BRIC? BRIC is a hardware and cloud services technology company based in Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya, to be specific. And the focus for us has been on rugged connectivity. People, for us sitting here in Atlanta, it's hard to understand some of the challenges and realities of connectivity in some countries around the world. Those of us who live in Nairobi and New Delhi have very different infrastructure needs and very different infrastructural issues, right? So why do we use technology designed for London and LA when we live in Nairobi, right? So the reality for us in Africa is the power is unreliable. It oscillates between 150 to 250, even 400 volts, right? So if I carry a bunch of routers from here, and they constantly shorten. Connectivity is unreliable, and there's challenging environments, there's dust, there's heat. And these are things that no one designing technology over here thinks about for a place like that. And I thought I'd throw up Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and realizing that today, in 2014, I think they should add Wi-Fi. And this is all kind of leading up to talking about BRIC. So this is a device that we built and designed in Nairobi, Kenya. And I actually have one over here. That's what it looks like. That's the finished BRIC. And that's actually an antenna that goes on the BRIC, right? So when we started out with BRIC, we weren't sure if this was something people would actually be interested in. So we launched a Kickstarter, and we were looking for $125,000. We raised $172,000. So that's kind of what the BRIC looks like. It's a device that has a battery, it has a hard drive, it'll provide Wi-Fi for up to 20 people, and it has 8 hours of battery life. And you can also charge your phone and iPad on this device as well. If you have a really bad connection, you can plug in an antenna like this, or you can, there's some bigger ones out there. You can put on top of a car or on top of a building, right? So we have been testing and, working on this device for the last year. We like to do BRIC expeditions. Like this is one where we drove to northern Kenya to try and capture and video stream the solar eclipse. This is one of the most adverse environments out there. And our BRIC worked out there. So what does the BRIC ecosystem look like? So there's the core BRIC. We call the additions to the BRIC mortars, brick and mortar. And obviously, a play on words. My mother-in-law is a school principal, and she takes offense to mortar and brick for misspelling. And then we also have the brick cloud, so you can manage these devices off the brick cloud. You can have 1, you can have 10, 20. You can manage all of them remotely. And just to give you an idea of what the brick mortar looks like, this is one, and it actually plugs into the bottom of the brick. So there's an expansion slot at the bottom of the brick. You guys familiar with Arduino and Raspberry Pi? Anyone? I'm sure everyone is, right? Kind of. So this is built with Raspberry Pi. It includes a hard drive and learning materials. And why did we build this? Because we had a problem in Kenya in some schools. The government in Kenya has been handing out tablets, but connectivity is a problem, right? So what we did with that particular Raspberry Pi mortar that attaches to the brick is we packed it with learning material, from Wikipedia to Khan Academy to all this stuff, the Kenyan curriculum, so that a brick running in this particular class can power the class so that people are pulling all their learning material without necessarily have to get online, right? We have been selling it for $199. We're trying to push it down because we're building the brick for developing economies. This is sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil, India, Indonesia, and this is kind of what the specs look like. So the role of the brick is, number 1, connecting people, and number 2, connecting sensors. The whole Internet of Things thing, right? So we're talking about some people, like in our case, putting a brick with sensors, to monitor water levels in wells. We've been working with Charity Water and a few other groups, and that's. But the long-term objective is final mile connectivity. There's potentially 800 million people that need to get connected. And just to show you kind of what the opportunity looks like in emerging markets, well, I don't need to say it, but you guys can see for yourself. So moving on is realizing that if we built this in Nairobi, we wanted to create an opportunity for other people in our community to do the same. So Gearbox is Kenya's first open makerspace for design and rapid prototyping. And it's inspired by our work with Brick and Ushahidi, and and the first brick was actually built at a fab lab. You guys know about the fab lab? It's so Fab Lab began as an outreach project by MIT's Center for Bits and Atoms, and they've been building Fab Labs all over the world and stock them with equipment, everything from 3D printers to CNC milling machines, all that good stuff. So Gearbox is actually will offer a unique space for members to showcase innovative ideas and share skills. Build all kinds of cool stuff. Are you guys familiar with Maker Faire? Anyone? Yeah, there was a Maker Faire in Atlanta, when was it, like a month or 2 ago? Yeah? So, there was one Maker Faire in Nairobi and there's one in Ghana as well. So we're trying to get into, building real tangible things and solving real problems, right? And I guess the quote to throw in here is, do what you can with what you have where you are. So some very quick lessons for us from doing all this stuff. Obviously we've been doing a lot of stuff, and I hope I didn't go over all this too quickly. So, obviously with regards to, especially crowdsourcing, plan, start early. And this alludes to the 10% problem, because I think sometimes we overestimate the value of technology in solving problems, right? You can't build an app for everything. You have to be immediately useful. Technology must be easy to deploy. It must be intuitive to use and simple to localize or customize, just because, again, It's a global economy. Engage the crowd because feedback is important. Protecting the crowd. Why would I throw this up here? Again, there's been quite a bit of naivety over the years about technology. We realized, especially working with countries in the Middle East, that pseudonymity, anonymity, those are very big things. You need to be aware that, people like, governments are tracking us, so we can't put everything out there, especially if it's too sensitive. And you guys know about Edward Snowden. Local knowledge is very important, and we have to help a community solve its own problems. We cannot create technology and look for a problem to solve, right? That's the whole point. Have an impact. Like for us, we could be making pancake apps in Silicon Valley and get $10 million to start a company, right? To track pancake shops. But really, we're interested in impact around the world. I'm very happy to say that everything we have done is, for us, is made in Africa. We're trying to build self-esteem on the continent. We can solve problems. Like I said before, we believe if it's made in Africa, it will work anywhere. And what if the solutions to the world's problems came from places like Africa, right? Out of adversity can come innovation, which has been our driving force. This is just some of our team. I thought I'd throw that up there before I wrap up this talk. So hopefully that was good and useful for you guys. Thank you.
And open up for questions now.
Hi, David. I have right here.
Okay.
Hey. So clearly you have a lot of ideas and you're moving on them. I'm just wondering, what idea do you wish that you had thought of first in the world?
Wikipedia. It is the best example of democracy we have on the planet today. So, yeah. Sure.
Habarigani.
Hey.
Earlier in your talk, you talked about the mapping platforms,
Yeah.
and with regards to like how it was even used with the Arab Spring. So I was wondering like if you could speak more to that and how y'all had to respond in those situations due to like ethics or where you stood politically, especially like at the end you mentioned with it, like while you're giving advice how you have to protect the crowd.
So I think the one example I'll use is HarassMap, which is based in Egypt, and that deployment happened right before the Arab Spring, right? And I think during that particular deployment, the government, folks from the Egyptian government would show up and knock on the door, of this particular group and tell them that, hey, we have been reading all your messages, right? And that just, told them, hey, wait a minute. If we're putting personally identifiable information on these platforms, we need to be absolutely careful, right? If they did things like encrypting communication between people on the platform, that would throw up red flags, right? So they were, security by openness, I guess, just being completely open and transparent. But, there are a lot of other countries where, like in Libya or Syria, we have over the years have had to build manuals and instruction on how to deploy securely and how to deal with things like personally identifiable information like mobile phone numbers. Like if you're reporting police brutality in Syria, or getting shot by a soldier, that might be a problem if they can trace that back to you. So I think for each particular deployment is saying, here's the manual, here's how to use it, here's what to do, but we don't run it ourselves, but we just want you to be careful. and less naive. I hope that answers it, kind of. Yeah. So,
Hi.
sure.
Thank you for coming. I think what you're doing is very great for the world.
Thank you.
My question to you is, I'm sorry I don't have any background in your company. Were you for profit or not for profit? And what led to that decision, and how does it affect your business?
So Ushahidi is a non-profit software company. We have thankfully been funded for the last couple of years, right? But when we actually spun out the hardware company Brick, just because we felt that to successfully create a world-class hardware and services company, it had to be a for-profit. We've actually, we got seed funding for it. We believe in the software component of, our crowdsourcing platform being completely, number one, being completely open and as a nonprofit, obviously, just so that we can get more people involved. Just because if we did make it a for-profit, I think a lot of people using our platform around the world would take issue with it. There'd be questions around who's funding it and, which government are you working with. We try to remain country agnostic for our open source platform, just because most of the time we're dealing with sensitive stuff. So I don't know if that makes sense. Good? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I can.
Hear me?
Yes.
1, 2, 3. Okay. It was interesting when you spoke on the trip that you took with the brick.
Yes.
I was writing some information down, so I didn't catch everything you said. Do you mind going back over that really fast?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I should say the brick team is right now, as we speak, in the middle of Lake Victoria in Africa. They're working with a school that is in the middle of the lake. And the whole point is we need to make sure that this device we are building, the brick, is as rugged and as tough as we say it is, and it serves the communities for whom we're building it for. So going up to the northern deserts of Kenya, the whole point was to find out if it actually worked. Could we set this thing up? Could we set up antennas and everything and get it rolling within a matter of hours, which we did. And it's also partly, PR, in a sense, when for us talking about the brick and selling it as well, so.
Hi there. So I'm kind of interested in knowing more about, what your plans are for the mortar that works with the brick, especially the Raspberry Pi version.
Yes.
Because obviously, education in Africa is, again, one of the critical things to just help Africa, kind of take the leap in this century. So what are your plans, in terms of spreading that throughout the continent? Because erratic power definitely makes using technology in the classroom in Africa really hard.
Yeah. So, I know a lot of people remember the OLPC. It wasn't particularly successful because the OLPC, while having really good intentions, this is the one laptop per child. You guys remember the green OLPC with rabbit ears, right? And I feel like the way they designed that was almost like people in the starship making something and dropping down into Africa and tossing these things out. I think I vaguely remember people saying, why don't we drop OLPCs from helicopters? And people will figure out what to do with them. But we're realizing in emerging markets, people love to tinker, right? They like to take apart this stuff. They like to go to the local hardware store to find parts to fix it when, it doesn't work. People have flip phones with two different, phones attached to each other, So we wanted to build a device that people can unscrew and take apart, right? And building especially that one mortar with Raspberry Pi was important. I think electronic prototyping platforms like Raspberry Pi are perfect for this, right? Because they encourage people to tinker and, write their own stuff. But it's particularly important in education technology because obviously there are connectivity issues. We're talking about packing this particular mortar with educational materials. It's really just for access. We don't want people to have to connect to the internet, download, and work again. So I know I'm kind of veering off your question, but I hope that kind of gets to it.
Is the government kind of investing in the brick and mortar, like spreading it into the schools?
So we have talked to the government. We're also talking to other organizations like Mozilla. Mozilla is particularly interested in throwing. They have some educational apps, for designing and building web applications that they hope to plant on this device. So we're hoping that partnering up with people like Mozilla can help us push this message, across to a few other countries. But no, we don't have any direct commitments from government yet. We made the pitch for that last week, which was part of why the UN Secretary General came down. So we'll see how that goes. Sure.
We have a question from the Georgia Tech Twitter page for ILE. It says, what role has Ushahidi played in the spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa?
That's a tough question. So we actually don't deploy ourselves, the platform. We know some people have taken it and used it themselves, but we, just because of how much effort it takes, we don't actively deploy in crisis and disaster situations ourselves. We just offer support. So there are a couple of deployments out there, but I don't know which ones off the top of my head. Sorry. Sure.
You go. Hi. You had a tagline about made in Africa. So I was wondering, what was your biggest, or what were the struggles you kind of went through with that you had to overcome when making your products in Africa, or did you have major struggles?
Oh, to make products?
Mm-hmm. What's the biggest one you had to overcome, essentially?
Funding is always an issue, just because when you pitch venture capitalists on building something like Brick in Kenya, they give you that look that says, I'm not sure people can actually build this stuff there, right? So it was really tough to raise money. The other thing is actually building the brick in Kenya is tough. We don't have the capacity. It's something we are working on, but we don't have the capacity at the moment. We are actually having these manufactured here in the United States, right? In Austin. Hopefully in China at some point, but really more than that, hopefully in Kenya. So it's just the capacity to build those kinds of electronic products in Kenya hasn't existed really. So that's been tough. It actually costs, when you think about government tariffs, it costs 40% more to bring a brick in parts. Just because of taxes on electronic components. So there have been quite a variety of difficulties. Right? So.
David, I have a question back here.
Yeah.
Clearly, you guys are very innovative and very prolific with coming up new programs and new products and new services. So from an organizational standpoint, especially being a nonprofit, and you're one of the 4 co-founders, so you were there from the beginning.
Yes.
How did your organizational structure change throughout these years, and then how do you not get overextended by new programs that you're developing and coming up? So how from an organizational structure perspective, how does that work?
That's a great question. So when we started out, we always kind of thought of ourselves as, just because when we started out, we didn't plan on building Ushahidi, right? we like to think of ourselves, we liked to, anyway, at the time, think of ourselves as a flat organization. No hierarchy, no one's boss. Obviously, that became problematic over the years because, number one, as a nonprofit, interacting with other nonprofits, you need some kind of structure. There has to be some kind of adapter to work with other big nonprofits, especially for the work we do. So yeah, we've had to adjust, to fit in. And over time, you realize there's no way around it. You have to make it work. Our team has also grown, so we've had to build some, formal hierarchy to manage the different teams. We have different small teams, but yeah.
Hi, my name is Anish Narang, and I'm an entrepreneur based in New Delhi, India. Great to be here. It was a pleasure hearing you out. I have two questions for you.
Sure.
One for Ushahidi in terms of, are you facing any cybersecurity threats, considering some of the information that you have is very sensitive and you're working very closely with the government, so how do you deal with it? And second question related to BRIC. It's a for-profit organization, so how do you deal, considering you are on the board of both a non-profit and profit, right?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with the differences? And of course, here the scalability of BRIC into emerging countries, right? So how do you deal with both the enterprises since you have the same owners? So these are the questions. Thank you.
Would you mind repeating the first?
The first one? The cybersecurity.
Oh, cybersecurity issue.
Yeah.
Like I said before, we try to remain government agnostic because so we have over the years, done things like moving our servers out of the United States, just because when you work with countries like the Sudan or most countries in the Middle East, it's always the U.S. government can confiscate. We're actually more worried about governments than cybersecurity, right? Just because a lot of times you're dealing with governments that can be directly affected by the outcome of, some of these events, right? So it's doing things like storing data in countries like Germany or Iceland, which have stronger copyright laws, data protection laws, things like that. There are a variety of ways we have dealt with this stuff. Cybersecurity is always a problem. I mean, much like any other tech company, we have to do a lot of, aggressive analysis of our software, monitor for potential security vulnerabilities or vectors for threats, right? We deal with people like the Open Web Application Security team. I don't know if you've heard of OWASP. This is a group of people that help with ensuring that open source applications are secure. So we do a lot of constant, checking of our software. So then the second question is about the difference between a for-profit and non-profit. So we are actually trying to make this kind of a hybrid, right? A social enterprise where our nonprofit is working with for-profit. And the ed tech space is one place where Ushahidi and BRIC kind of come together, right? We have to work together in this space. Obviously, culturally within both BRIC and Ushahidi, things are a little different just because a for-profit is driven by, obviously, beyond impact, sale of widgets, right? So the team and generally the people that work on it are, a little different, We have to sell so much, or we have to be this successful or meet our numbers or etc. So culturally, both companies are slightly different. Yeah. So.
Okay, me? As hard as it is to raise angel and venture capital for a for-profit enterprise, and you give away some of your control, when you do that, it seems to me it's really hard to collect money for a nonprofit. So how do you manage your sustainability and your scale up on the nonprofit side, and how did you get the start with your first funding for the nonprofit organization?
So here's the thing: the nonprofit actually owns 20% of the for-profit. So we're hoping that the for-profit is successful, because if it is, then we will no longer have to try to raise money constantly. Grant funding is a long tail, right? For which, over the years, funding gets less and less and less. We got the first bit of funding for the nonprofit from Omedia Networks. This Piero Media, for those of you who know or don't know, is the founder of eBay. And he has a nonprofit that focuses on nonprofit technology startups. So we have actually been working with them for quite a few years, right? And they've funded people like Wikimedia, that owns and runs Wikipedia, amongst others. And we've had other funders, thankfully, through the years. But yeah. Sure.
One of the largest problems in crisis situations is the unavailable frequency, because everyone's trying to basically access the same waves, and that's a natural thing.
Yeah.
What do you see with technology in the future? Like, I know cognitive radio is something that people are talking about, a big buzzword, especially in crisis situations. Have you guys looked into that for Ping and Crisisnet?
I'm sorry, what, the radio? Cognitive radio.
We've talked about it in some of the classes here, the IT classes in the business school, where it scans the frequencies to see what's not being used. Say it's mainly for military, and if it's not being used, that people can use it, especially in crisis situations. But then once, say, the military needs to use it for whatever reason, it'll kind of block off that traffic until it's done being used and then reopen it.
So yeah, there have been quite a few people think about the almost like a doomsday, a connectivity doomsday of some kind, right? What happens if a government shuts off the internet? What do you do? I know there are people working with, transmitting data over radio, right, over CB, right? And cognitive radio, I think I've heard of it in different form, different names. But ultimately, I think we are very dependent on connectivity, especially the cell phone connectivity. I think in places like Syria, they shut off the internet, right? It becomes really difficult, right? In Sudan, they did the same. And I don't know, we haven't really come up with solutions yet, just because when it happens, you almost don't have time to prepare. And you realize that we are wholly dependent on this, this infrastructure being up, right? So we don't really have, people have talked about different stuff, but we don't have a solution yet. So,
Over here. You had mentioned getting local knowledge was really important. And since we're in the business of creating lots of things here at Georgia Tech, how do we create things that are more universal, and how do we build empathy for people that, we're not familiar with the conditions in Kenya? So how do we build that empathy to build better products?
Building better products almost requires immersion. To some degree, the technology we have now, like we like to say, it gives people a digital front seat to events happening around the world, right? But, even with our maps, each of those red dots sometimes represents a person, a life, or something. But we're still kind of disconnected, right? But it requires immersion. I'll give you an example. So like this year, I took 12 MIT students to Kenya to work on some projects, right? And it's them being in a vast space. We're trying to solve problems around poaching, because poaching is a problem, like in Kenya. And while we were in this particular camp, 3 elephants were killed. But their thoughts before they got there was, we can just dump a bunch of sensors around the national park, and we can solve this problem. And then it's them getting there and realizing how vast the space is. 500,000 acres is huge. That's the size of like the state of Rhode Island, right? But again, even building empathy, that requires immersion as well. So I feel like you have to be there. I think the best quote to put here is, idealism is directly proportional to the distance from the problem. So we have to be there. There's no way around it. So.
Hi, I want to talk to you about the influx of African immigrants who've come to the United States in the past, 20 years, and this notion of brain drain that has kind of occurred, where a lot of people have stayed as opposed to going back to their their respective countries. So what are your thoughts on bridging the gap between the solutions that should be coming from Africa, from Africans, as well as the Africans who've lived in America for these 2 or so decades? How can the two kind of unify and work together towards the same goals? Are there any particular incubators or any central points that they can kind of link up through? Because a lot of times you have people who have the same idea, but they don't know how to get in contact with each other. So,
that's a tough question. There has been brain drain, but you have to remember that for the next decade, for a lot of Fortune 500 companies or multinationals, the growth market is sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, right? So and I'll give an example. I don't know if you saw that GE Energy, it's based up here in Marietta, and they said, there was an article on Forbes like maybe a couple of weeks ago, and it basically said that the entire growth market is sub-Saharan Africa, Coca-Cola and everyone else, right? So I don't necessarily think there's as huge brain drain now. Between 1990 and 2005 there was, just because there was a lot of countries, it was very tumultuous, right? Now not so much. With the entry of China into most African countries, there's an influx of capital, right? So people are building real businesses now, right? I would encourage Africans in the diaspora to, kind of stay on top of things and connect. I think it's the responsibility and the burden for this falls on the diaspora to connect, not necessarily the people in Africa anymore, right? So yeah, that's, you have to engage, they have to go back. I don't know, I can't really answer that question. Not well enough anyway, so. Sure.
So, I'm a big fan of the kind of stuff you've done, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here.
Oh.
And it's related a little bit to the last question. I want to know is what drives you to do what you're doing? Because, based on what we've heard and your capabilities, you could easily be working for any of the Fortune 500s and, be a part of Google or whatnot. But you're doing what you're doing, and I don't think, I could be wrong, it's not directly profit that drives you. Something else does. And remember, there are lots of students in this room who would benefit from hearing something like that from you.
Well, to answer that question, we have actually, in this year, we have stolen 3 employees from Google. I'm very happy about that. And I asked that same question to them, and they just said, they felt like they were spinning their wheels in a huge organization. Couldn't directly see the impact of their work, right? So that partly answers the question, its impact. I'm from Kenya, I'm from Africa, and I like to say that I'm staking Africa's claim on the future. This is one reason we're doing this. We're trying to build this ecosystem of, of stuff, first, world-class products and services. And, and we're sitting at the forefront of that wave. So it's a very exciting time. I think this is probably the best thing I'll ever do in my life. So, yeah.
Thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.